Hello. Okay, in this video, which is going to pertain much more to my character perhaps than yours, I'm going to go into detail with the hair for my selection that's going to fit the technique and style for my Larry Bird character. I'm going to use Xgen for the top of the head to blend it in and make it look like the original design. I'm going to use a combination to thicken up this thin enough but more present mustache here. I'm going to use PaintFX for that. And for the eyelashes, I already have established here those cards, those transparency cards. And for the eyebrows, they're sort of textured in here. I may go with PaintFX for those too. So for my solution, I'm going to be using a hybrid approach of different kinds. And if you notice on my head, it might be the same, might be similar with yours, that I have a little bit underneath textured. And you can see the texture seam there. If you look close, it's going to be covered. So that's strategic. So the solution I'm making here would be good for a short animation. Or something in production. It might be with Xgen hair. It might end with PaintFX, even though it's a little bit. It might be heavy going for something real time. I am already thinking about what the deliverable is or what the end goal is. And for this character, myself, I'm thinking it will be likely a short production. Similar to if you were to do a capstone or something. So that guided my choices of making those kind of techniques. Again, Xgen for the hair, some PaintFX here, possibly some PaintFX on the eyebrow. Not quite sure, I might leave that off. And then I already have, again, those transparency cards. Okay, so I'm going to go more step by step with my approach for the Xgen hair. And possibly if you're doing Xgen, it could be useful for your knowledge as well. And by the way, shortly after we do these solutions for the hair, any mustache and that kind of thing, we're going to go right into lighting. I know we've done a little of that, just set up basic area lights and using the Arnold renderer for the fantasy body and of course the hands, fantasy hands. I'm going to go into lighting quickly after we custom and finish the hair. All right, well, let's just start with the scalp, and we're going to approach it with Xgen hair and Xgen grooming. There were two other videos there were two other videos where those techniques were mentioned. If you had missed the background detail, just go back 2 videos ago. You can watch them both when I talk, and it's going to give a little more technical background to what these are. But let's just start into it from the first step. Okay, first we're going to select areas of the scalp. It's kind of like PaintFX, kind of like Make Live. We have to designate the area we want Xgen to emerge. Otherwise, he's going to be hair all over his face. It's going to emerge from every face that's selected. So we're going to have to literally separate the faces or separate this skull cap or the scalp away from his head and make that Xgen emergent. So here I could use the paint tool. That is the paint selection tool, and it allows us to select vertices or faces just by painting around. And it's rather crude because we have a really simplified version of the face. That is, we don't have many squares for the scalp. It's rather simple, so you're going to have to make choices of what goes in and what goes out to the scalp in the selection. And the hair is going to hang over all these anyway, so you won't see edges like this that imply as I'm selecting the faces. It's not going to be that geometric or anything. You can see how the hair is going to cover over things once it grows out of this area. All right, I chose to represent the selection this way which gives them a little bit of a hairline back here, more of a maybe bird-like characteristic. Having this hair, it's going to come emerge from these faces and hang over. And around the ear, similarly, you know, if you had reflection or symmetry on, you could have the same, or you could go with asymmetry, up to you, but that's going to be my selection. And next I'm going to detach that and separate that from the head. So of course under modeling, I'm in edit mesh detach with those faces selected, and that detaches the selection. Next, with its next after it's detached, I'm going to separate it from mesh separate, and now we have two different pieces, that scalp piece and this piece. You can see a little bit that tension has built up in the mesh as they're now two different pieces, where this is popped up just a bit, you know, because once it's free piece of topology, it has its own surface tension, as it were, with here. If you wanted to avoid that, you could, before you did the selection and detach, you could insert more edges around to keep the shape more conform. But in this case, I know I'm going to cover all this area with hair. I'm going to have the hair kind of laying forward, you know, about 3 or 4 inches long, maybe on the top. And here it's really flush to the head. You're not going to really notice it. As you can see, the line is there, but it's really faint, even more faint than a texture border. But here where it's present, and this would be needing correction if it was very short hair and you would see that hairline. Then you would have to go in and probably insert, before you detach it, insert more edges with the insert edge tool over to keep this really high density. We're trying to aim for a really low poly count, just as a good habit, but we could go in here and smooth it under mesh smooth, and we see the poly count now, how high that is. So if we backed up a few steps and did that to the whole head, then separate it, it would involve a lot more painting, but would have a smoother contour over. So if you have that kind of situation, and you know you're not going to maybe a real-time outcome, this can be made into a node to smooth or unsmooth. I could get in that detail some other time, but just know that you'll see examples on the internet of mesh that look like this, much more dense than what you've created, and you think, oh well, why were we making our mesh so light? It's because it's much easier to go up than down. So if I needed to use this for multiple applications, not just a short movie, I needed to use it for a real-time thing, I do have this node in here for a smooth face where it says divisions 1. I could put in 0 and then go back to my original base mesh. That's in the inputs. All right, well, back to it. I am just going to accept this because it's going to be covered with hair in my design. And you have noticed, by the way, when you detach the mesh from, you know, the scalp from the face, it's keeping that original UV space that you've made and using the same painting. So it's the same 01 UV set, and these shells have just been separated on different geometry. So you click one, you see it, all the UV sets are in here, all the textures are in here, and you can see the toggle between them, so you're not separating UV sets, it's the same one. All you're doing is separating the mesh one from another, and these can be combined back into one mesh when you're rigging, or you need it represented as one mesh in a selection. Alright, next step, with that scalp selected, we're going to go, it's under modeling, then generate, and then we're going to go under interactive groom splines. So it's create interactive groom splines, and it produces this result with the splines. Now, just to note, if I selected faces of a mesh, like eyebrows like this, I'm not going to do them with Xgen. I just wanted to show you, we separated the scalp to have that piece separable from that piece. Now, we didn't have to do that. You can select faces and say interactive groom splines to the face. You say create interactive groom splines, and it's going to connect it right to the mesh. So why did we do that with a separate scalp? It just gives us more versatility and control over what's just going on in this mesh area of the scalp. You can select specific faces of an existing mesh, and you don't have to detach or anything. You can skip that step. It will be easier to control sectioned off areas as different mesh. Let's also give an example. If you would want to swap out hair techniques, then you just have only the scalp to deal with. Another reason is when in the rigging process, I know we don't get to it, and you want to just do a facial expression shape animation only for the face where there's no Xgen attached, that will lead you out of the woods and some complications with having Xgen attached to faces. All right, let's go back to our hair on the scalp as it is. When I selected that scalp mesh and said generate, create interactive groom splines, it automatically opened this editor just for Xgen. And specifically, this is called the Xgen Interactive Groom Editor. So it allows you to groom these splines. The full menu can be popped open here in the workspace. We've been working with Classic, and maybe you've been using some of these for modeling. All these kind of tools that you might need, and the ability to go into the mesh here as well, handy to up on a column. So we have these splines represented here in sculpt, scale, description base. All of these things you can think about almost as Photoshop layers of one effect mixing with the other, only in 3D hair splines. And they all have their own kind of attributes. You can change its smoothness or thickness, its scale and sculpting. This technique is a lot more friendly than PaintFX or anything you use, and you can really get control over it. One large downside of PaintFX is that it's hard to control its grooming, kind of all over the place, and there's demos with splines you could attach to curves, PaintFX, but still it really goes all over the place and wherever it wants to. PaintFX, that is. But with Xgen, you can really control, and that we have our scalp separated, and the length of the spline, anything about its appearance and behavior, we really have full control over the groom and these kind of combing and grooming tools in addition. So it is very fast and intuitive. And what's nice here too is it puts these horizontal tabs. You can jump from the outliner to the channel box right within this square, and below attribute editor tool settings. So everything you need in this widened column. Very convenient. And then when you start clicking the pluses here and you have sculpt and sculpt layer and you have edit, these have their own channels in which can be edited, and clicking within sculpt shows you all the layers which can be blended with each other for the final effect. And then scale, you can globally scale everything, all the hairs together. Add more sculpt layers to keep a sophisticated equation going with everything involved, one layer, and then blend between them to get any kind of hair effect you desire. And here, by clicking under key, that button allows you to key and change the hair position or style over time. Alright, just back to the big effector here, scale. Just start out with scale, and this controls the global scale right here, scale modifier of all the hairs in the groom. And we're giving him some length here. A bit longer hair on top than I do on the side. I could approach this later, but overall I'm getting the longest general length for the hair. Next we're going to go to the overall description, which is suppose even more global. I mean, you can see all the attributes of it and change the settings inside the global description. After we click this description, then we're going to look for the shape node. This is why it's good to have width scale. We could make it a little thinner, and we can taper it. You see a tapering needle-like tip on it, which is somewhat more realistic. Maybe about there. And the taper. Also, we can go to the base node here, description 1 base, and thicken up the hair so we can see less of the scalp. If we go to under description base, the density multiplier, about there. Okay. Also, if you're worrying it's getting too dense, you want to keep track of the hair count. I'm sure you don't want to count them yourself. There's a display here, just like in the poly display, heads up display for poly count. You have in here the display for Xgen info, and here it's telling you the amount of splines, which is getting pretty high, and the GPU memory that it takes. We're ready with that look to actually comb and treat and style the hair. We have our own salon ready to begin right here in the Xgen tab here. All of these different icon tools. This is all for grooming. As well, here in the Generate tab under Modeling menu set, you have interactive grooming tools, whichever you prefer, and it has a tear off menu. You could tear that off and use them here. All right, but we're going to start right here with these two tools, the comb and the grab button. Then we're going to more refined grooming tools to get the look and the style that we need. So if I start just with the comb, you see it's just one. Turn on the symmetry by going over to the tool settings, and here attribute editors conveniently located. Tool settings tab, here we'll have symmetry settings. We can set it for object X and then B. Hold and drag just like PaintFX and our other brush tools. M to change the power. B for brush size, and then we can start to comb both sides of the head symmetrically. You're going to see that it creates these bald spots, unfortunately, but there is a button here. You can click Collide with Meshes. Just turn that on, and then when you paint over it, it will collide with the scalp without going underneath it, thus creating a bald spot painting. And it has this golden default hair it's beginning with. Of course, we're going to change that color later. So it's just showing this luster that doesn't need or have to be there, but indicating the hair tube-like shader that's already on it. So I'm really looking at my sample right now, turning back on the image planes that have been on there all the while, cross-check with the reference. This about length at the top, tufted around and out, and then short on the sides. Kind of like this. Oh, he has more like tufts of hair shooting out here, which we're just changing the splines. This is of course not the rendered look in the end, getting the overall general behavior of the hair flow. And you might have seen in the other tutorial, if you wanted to create a part that is the comb, the hair is now combed straight back, you can use the freeze tool for one side and then push, and vice versa the other, which I should show. So here's the freeze tool here with the snowflake and the brush. Just click it, turn off, make sure symmetry is off in the tool settings. Then paint just one side of the hair to make sure it doesn't move. Then everything light blue is frozen, and then you can comb it away from that frozen area to indicate part in the hair. Should turn off symmetry there with the comb tool before I use it. It's just doing one side. If you're done freezing everything in blue, you can click on freeze all and start again, and this time freeze this part, detail selection work. part brush here, which you can go along the seam of the brush. You can explore these. Let's push his hair away from each other. If you want to flatten it, retaining the part that's already there. There's also the smooth tool, straightens hairs and smooths transitions between styles so you don't get really mussed up bedhead, but it just takes whatever styles you already have embedded in there and blends them together a little bit. All right, just taking a twirl around. It's maybe if we consider the individual hairs, the splines, it is a bit too uniform in direction with each other, and we can kind of disturb the way hairs might tangle with one another differently. I know it looks tangled, but overall it's a bit too silky straight, and when we render it we'll see that too. And so we can put here in the sculpt right here, there's opportunities to put layers and layers and layers and more things that change its look. And here we could put a sculpt layer to give it a little disturbance, to give the hairs a little bit intertangled with each other, interacting with each other a little bit more by putting a layer here. So to do this, we're going to add a noise modifier in the sculpt layer. We're going to say add modifier noise here. Okay, so it added to that sculpt layer, and now we could dial in from the very beginning how much noise, and you putting the 0 on the sculpt layer, it goes back to the original default set style to 1, and in the noise itself then we see it's disturbed a little bit. It's not as straight. You see it's like you see now it's interacting with each other, intertwined a little bit more. So a little bit more natural. Here we can see the difference just clicking it on and off as a layer effect. You see how the difference with the noise filter on or off. The hairs are a little bit more entangled, like they would realistically. And if you select below the attribute editor for that tool upstairs here in the Xgen, we have some levels that we can change in the frequency and the magnitude, set all on 1, so you could have it really start to be entangled. And this is pre-rendered in Arnold, so this is not how it's going to naturally look, but it's a template or direction, let's say. So we could change its magnitude to maybe a little bit over 1 to give it a more entangled appearance without being too much. And other things you can change. It's random seed, preserving length. Other things, it's just fun to play with without full description. You can just try it, see what it does. Make sure you got good eyes on what the original setting was. Sometimes things don't undo, so you could just glance, okay, it's the normal setting is at 1 each, and you have different full control over other things. Anyway, we're going to leave everything pretty much the same and change the magnitude to maybe 1.5, 1.5, and that looks more natural. And FYI, we look up here in this vertical list for Xgen, similar to Photoshop or After Effects, its order of stacking matters, and you can grab and move items here. If you say wanted to move noise to effect instead of the sculpt layer, you can drag it under and affect the scale. A middle mouse button, dragging that and dropping it under scale, and that's going to put noise on the scale level. Very interactive and experimental to try different quick node changes to get different results. Just a tip. And you may try something just by dragging and say, okay, well that's giving it the look I want, or no, that's too extreme. I don't want that, and put it back. You can undo or drag it back to the under the sculpt layer. And knowing with one quick move here or there, zeroing in on your design. Now, all these affect all the hairs, all the noise and scale, and we've been putting here in the attribute editor. It's affecting all the hairs on the head. If you wanted just noisy or scraggly part of the hair in one section only, you could use the tool brush for creating Xgen noise. It's just selecting it. Noise brush is activated, then you could paint with noise on specific areas. If this is getting too straight or not naturally entangled enough, this is how you can spot correct that. Now as you're doing this, it's wise, again, like a 2D stacking, vertical stacking layers, to do this on its own layer. Create a separate layer for each effect, which you could just keep adding to sculpt and add a modifier, or add just another layer and keep building it up so as you can isolate it if you want to lessen or mix them at a future date. So if I'm just doing this, I can't go back to that later and interact with it, any little changes. But if I put it on a layer, and a sculpt layer for another noise layer, and use the brush on it, it would keep that change or effect prescribed to that layer. So you could change it, as we can see in the sculpt layer, go back to where it's 0 again, and it has 0 effect. Really great way to blend and get control. You can also create an effect and create a layer just for the clumping of hair. Say if some of this is going to not be so dry and frilly, if it's going to clump up to little spikes or peaks, you could do that and put that on its own layer. So something like this, and if this natural affects all the hair, which if you just wanted to affect the front of the hair where it's getting a little more moisture and clumping up only in that area, you could do so with the brush. So below tools with the clump effect, you can lessen it, which is lessening all over the hair here, and more tools here for preserved length and stuff you can experiment with. But note, I'm doing this all trying to separate the effects on the unique layers. So right here for individual parts clumping is the clump tool, or the clump brush. Clicking it. Then what you would do is put in the overall layer here the clump on 0, the clump effect to 0, and then with the clump tool just to select areas that you want clumped and or sticking together. So you want to put collide with meshes on that tool as well. And then say you want the hair to clump just in the front of the head, you could do that. Just these bangs area if you want that to clump. Like that. I know that's not exactly what we want, but just as a demo, then the nice thing is here we can go, since it is on its own layer, we can affect all of it at once, as well as having individual control. I'm going to back up. It's not exactly what I wanted. I'm going to modify that a bit. And using the clump tool again, I'm just going to change its strength to much lower in the tool settings. Just tame some of the sides. It's coming in. Maybe have that clump a bit, and just maybe the tip of some of these, have them clump. Down here at the back of the neck where it gets more moisture. Gonna have that clump. A little bit there. You know, any areas that if there are texture borders or whatnot, we want it covered, we can just comb over it using the comb tool. So I'm going to have it clump up a little bit more spiky than in the reference, just for added character, I suppose, and a little more mussy, like it's been, you know, like he's active playing basketball and his hair is getting a little messed up. That's my goal for this on-the-fly redesign of the hair, but really getting close to what I want too. And just to point out a few other tools here, we have an increased density tool, place tool. Here's density. So we have the global density, but if you want certain areas that are getting light to take on more hairs and become more dense, you can add that to areas, say right here. I don't really want to do that. I'll leave it how it is. And we have trimming and lengthening. Here's the lengthening tool, and right next to it, cutting and trimming hairs that intersect. So I mentioned that he has shorter hair on the side and longer, poofier hair on the top. So I'm going to grab that. Again, we could put that on a layer, add modifier, then have its own adjustment layer we can change, which would be advisable. I'm just going to, because it's just a little bit, I don't plan on changing it much. I just add a little bit more here. It's up to you if you want to create more and more layers for each. A little more length and poofiness. The strength is awful high, so I'll turn that down. And then probably go back to your clump tool and clumping them up if it's getting, you know, too wild. Clumping them up. Another thing, I'd be click, 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 and I really hate where it's going. If it were on its own layer, I could just select that, take that down in its attributes, and just go back to 0 just by adjusting the sliders. And as I mentioned, we also have this shortening tool or cut tool or trim. It's called cut tool. It trims hairs, making them shorter, so something's getting out of hand and a bit wild here and up. And of course we're going to the tool settings. So for these strays sticking out, you can set the tool for strength you like in the settings. If you want to add single strands of hair, be more detailed and surgical, this place tool can do that. If you have areas that seem like, okay, there's a bald spot there, you want to just add individual full for that area. That will stick out and need to be groomed though, so again, working within the layers will help you depending on how complex you want to go. And with this tool, just the select tool, you can select hairs as a highlight. Select using the brush to select hairs, and the ones lit up are the ones you could put only the effects on. So if you wanted to change just the ones you selected, it's going to, you know, affect the surrounding area as well with certain tools. But let's say with the comb tool, it's going to favor those areas. Clump tool, it's kind of like the soft modification. It affects the surroundings as well, but it's most sensitive to the selected parts. Then in the tool settings for it, deselect all to go back to overall grooming the hair. One note is that this tool, thickening or thinning, is not a layerable effect. Um, it's something that's a kind of a one-off you're using with a brush, so it's not going to be recorded as a layered effect. And we a little bit more on this brush. We call it the density tool. Adds or removes hair. You can think of it as thickening or thinning. If I draw with it just on top of it's going to add hairs. That's the left mouse button, of course. But if I hit Control and paint with it, it removes hairs. So right here, the hairline should be a little more faded in, not so much a line as it's kind of fading in for this particular character. Poofy here, but here it's a bit too much. So again, with that thickening tool and then holding down Control as you paint, it's going to remove density or remove hairs. So if you did want to make a character balding, this is a good way to do it with the thinning part of the hair. If you wanted to remove and create a bald or balding character or something. We're just trying to be more like natural with the fade-in hairline. That's all here. Okay. Back to maybe trimming up some length here with the cut tool right there. And any tool has similar options. Most of them do with the face cutoff angle, which say you want to select only some of these faces. The face cutoff angle can be very small. You barely see it. So a bit of an effect on where that's focused to a large cutoff angle. And so if we're trying to smooth in and make that trim like a haircut just in the back, you can do that. That is, it's not affecting the selection. The brush size is affecting the selection, but the effectiveness of how the tool cuts off and mixes and dies off as a tool effect can be changed in the cutoff angle. And you can change the minimum remaining length and all that. All right, we spent a lot of time on this. I'm sure you could go in and have fun and customize this more to really the style you want, as close as any other technique to the realistic style of hair for your character. You're going to get the most performance out of the Xgen tool, probably, for the cost of labor. So, oh, and by the way, if you're choosing any of these tools, another nice little shortcut tip, and you've used marking menus before, if you hold shift down, right click, you would have had to choose a tool already. But if you want to jump just with a gesture to one tool to another, holding shift, right click, you can jump to freeze, clumps, noise, grab, length, and you can get really good and really fast at this if you do it for a while. And it's all a preference of what kind of tools you want to use up here, or tear off menu, or marking menu, or wherever. Okay, so to start upon the color for the hair and all of its other attributes of appearance, we're going to select the top description node, and in the below Xgen Interactive Groom menu, we have the attribute editor also below. In the attribute editor, select description 1 shape. Hair physical shader node. That's what I wanted to say. The hair physical shader node, and here we see all those default hair colors, which of course we're going to change now. And diffuse, primary, secondary highlight, glint, transmission, all that good stuff. So probably need not much description. If I had to adjust those, I'm going to start with the diffuse, that's the general color of the hair. And I'm going to give it a bluish color, but I mean, I want it to have a bluish sheen along with the fantasy color of his skin, but I'll give it some kinds of highlights and glints that also have a range of color palette within the greens and within the blues and oranges. We'll see. All right, so I'm going to start with root color and have that a little bit darker blue. We'll have to see. Dark blue, purple. This can be changed. It's coming into the root to meet the scalp, which the skin is blue. Then the tip color, I'm going to have like maybe a little bit of a green blue, so it gives kind of a gray appearance. All right. And for the highlight, instead of white, the primary highlight, I'm going to put in, let's see, I thought maybe orange. That sort of orangey color. And I'm going to work with the other highlights. This is establishing a color look to his hair and would be repeated with the mustache and should be adjusted eventually on the eyelashes too when they get lit and rendered. I can play with it a little bit here. I changed the root color to more of an orangey. I wanted to pick up a surreal look, like a fantasy. I don't want to be anyone's realistic hair, so to speak. Maybe it looks like it's silvery hair that matches some of the hues of the skin color, and also it to change in luster as it turns to a fantasy kind of color, not pinpointing anything specific that you might see every day, but more in the realm of creative invention and fantasy. So I'm just experimenting here and put maybe I'm gonna blend and see where I go. Have things like diffuse weight, the overall darkening of the diffuse, transparency, of course, ambient color, incandescent, which means glow, base. Okay, good time to save, and it's probably also the opportune moment to open up the Arnold window and see how this is looking in the render so far. I already have these lights placed in the scene from before. There's a point light, a couple area lights. So I'm going to pop open the ever useful Arnold render view under Arnold here, Arnold render view. And we're going to start the render engine right here and make sure we have the right camera, which we do. And so convenient and interactive. So as we move, it live updates the render. So let's get a good angle on the hair so far. Okay. All right, so here it is so far. That's what it looks like in the hardware. Just the window, and here's the Arnold render view. Much better. It's already starting to look pretty good. Consider overall color and how it changes, how it interacts with the scalp. If the roots stand out too much, I thought maybe I wanted to blend them in with blue, but maybe it might look good to have them stand out a little bit. You'll see this self-shadowing that Arnold puts in automatically. All right, this would be a great place to make any adjustments and see the live updates. Remember, right here, remember to go to the description and the attribute editor. You're looking for hair physical shader, and you can change flip it back again if you want to see what it looks like with blue roots coming out with blue and ending in orangey. You can save any colors you want on this palette store. I might have a little color to these lights, which is affecting the output color, but sort of I was going. I want to retain some of the pigment of the original blonde hair that Larry Bird has, but also I wanted to infuse it with the blueness of his skin and that fantasy surreality of it. So I'm going to play with it a little bit. All right, I'm close to what I like here, and note how different it looks in the viewport, the hardware render, and what it really looks like in the Arnold render. So this is what you're aiming for. This is only a very gross suggestion of what the color might be. So make sure you're doing tests about now in the production. And I think I'm going to settle on a bluish root again that's going to merge into light brown. Let's go with blondish pigment and with these kind of glints and looks. So I'm really close to signing off on that as finished. And you'll need to place lights in dark parts. Arnold's very dark otherwise, and you can't really see anything till you move a light. And pump that up, as you know, and in the exposure of the light, I want it more blonde than brown, so maybe make a few tweaks. And I'll leave it at that for the Xgen finished. The Xgen component, let's say, for the head finished. What I mentioned at the start of this video is that it's going to be needed to match any other facial hair that's involved, or fur, anything on your character, to match what's going on with the hair. So these eyelashes, which we carefully made with cards, could be tinted and matched there. And I mentioned we're also going to thicken up this mustache part by using PaintFX. Yes, we could use Xgen for that as well. I just wanted to mix stuff up and maybe add a little bit of wisp of eyebrows too, to add to that existing bump and texture there. So let's do those few things. Won't take long, and that will conclude this video after that. Then we will be focused on lighting and the completion of the entire project after that part. Well, let's look at the eyelashes first. Let's go back to the workspace, just the classic Maya workspace. And where we had the channel box and attribute editor. So I'm going to right click material attributes for this eyelash here to highlight that geometry and get at its materials here. I know under color I have the file texture here, which I can access. Also I have the, even better, the hypershade saved here on my shelf. Of course I can go to it and identify, if I'm confused, like which one of these, if I didn't name carefully, I did, I have eyelash here, but say you didn't know, you could go to edit and say select materials from objects, and it will highlight the one you need. Double click, many ways, whichever, if you're working with texture, it's good to have the hypershade open. And with it, then we can look at these textures, and on the sample object right here, see how it's rendering as well as right in the viewport. And since we're Arnold, we're going to make sure that render view is open. As always, if I right click, Graph Network below in the work window shows you everything in the inputs and outputs and all of the nodes that are involved Another really quick way, if you're working a lot with shaders, you should be working in the hypershade and this work area. So it tells you everything you need to know. And just clicking on these boxes, these are in fact nodes in Maya, represented by a label. Here's the texture, very convenient. Here's the placement texture node. Here's the other one, and the opacity for the net. That's of course the transparency map on the AI standard shader, the opacity node. Going fishing around otherwise through the interface is just going to be frustrating, take a long time. So you have the right tool open, the right menu. Hypershade, just right click, oops about that, right click graph network, and it centralizes below the whole network that's involved in that shader. You probably already knew that, just a reminder to work that into your pipeline. Okay, so this hypershade window is very holistic. You don't need it, well, it duplicates what's going on here in the channel box and attribute editor, just like the Xgen window, putting it all in one place if you like. So it could be whatever you select here is updated here, just so you know. For me, I'd rather get that out of the space. It takes up a lot and it's blocking, so I'm going to keep it off my capture screen here and just change stuff here. So this big one here is the material, which is AI standard surface shader here. This material, just double click the big tall one. Let's get it out of the way. And then we have, just for me to show you in demo, we have the AI standard surface here and things we can adjust. Here we have under the base, the weight is 0. If we want that color to come through, because we have a color channel put on it, we can turn up the weight and mix that. I put it on 1 so it's fully mixed. In the original paint, the color layer, we gave it an orangey, anticipating the oranginess of the hair to come. But let's say it doesn't match, or slightly hue is different and the value of orange. We could either go back to the Photoshop file and modify that, or we could try some stuff here. Here I just only turned up the weight. And with color, I open up the file texture for the original. Here, you remember all eyelashes are on there. And if I open the color balance on this file node, I have color gain, which defaults to white. If I click it, and I can juice it up a little bit with the hue. I can move to greens or blues or reds or purples, violets, that is. And when I back up to see if it's matching the hair, let's see if I can get both in there. Okay, from this position I can see everything a little better to match it. And maybe in the color gain, might be, let's see, a little bit cooler version of orange, maybe not so bright gold that would call too much attention to itself. Maybe just desaturate or darken it a little bit would be good. Can lighten it here with saturation, but the value could go up too. Can find a nice sweet spot for that. And if this is not doing it, of course, you can just go right back to Photoshop and use all the tools there to change the saturation, hue, or value. Okay, just highlighting different sections as it renders. We can find a happy spot that it's going to match. I think I'm going to keep it there. Let's see, I probably need to put more light on it on the front of the face. Okay, just to point out, under base of the AI standard surface, we also have this trait called metalness. And interesting, you may want to explore it. If you turn it up, we're just looking at the eyelashes here. It creates sort of a tinsely look to it, a metallic look, and it might be good if you're trying to do some moisture or shiny part to the eyelash. Let's zoom in a bit. Here's with metalness on 0, which is default, and turning it up here to 1, you can start to see how it's looking like tinsel and glittering. Could simulate moisture. Maybe not. It's also reflecting the eye here, so it makes it also reflective as well as metallic. Maybe it's not really appropriate, but for some applications maybe it is, so I wanted to show you. I'm going to turn mine back to 0. Maybe just a little bit. Turn it on so you get some sparkle on the edge. I'll just turn that up to 0.2. In fact, a lot of this could be just trial and error experiment. So I did turn metalness up to about 0.3, so I got a little bit of glisten on the edge there. From afar it might look okay as a little bit of moisture tear on it. Maybe a bit more sensitive looking in the eyes. And of course, all 4 eyelashes are represented by one shader. So perhaps it went without saying if I didn't mention it before that I'm just changing that one shader and it's affecting everybody. But if you have a case where you have something that's more individualized, then you'd go into it. I did the same thing with the hair cards when I did hair cards on the other example. Trying to have, more from less. Trying to do fewer shaders and having them control more cards at once. So in a way, these lashes are cards or transparency hair cards. So I'm mixing up all these different techniques and trying to show you an economical way to use them all. As you build up your character, you're building up complexity that might start to slow down your interactivity with it. All right, I think I'm going to settle on that for the look of the eyelashes, and only one left to go is to add a little bit more physicality. It just looks kind of bumpy. Yes, the color texture is there, the bump is there. I should say the normal map is there, but it's not coming through so much in the render, and I did expect to beef that up just a little bit. So for it, I'm going to use PaintFX. And see how that goes, and if that goes well, then I'm going to maybe also spruce up the eyebrows. Well, let's start with the mustache. So I'm going to select just the face, and remember we have separation between scalp and face now, so it makes it more easy and directed, focused to paint upon. So selecting the face mask, mesh, then we're going to make it paintable with the modeling menu set, generate, and in the middle of the menu, make paintable. Okay. Then you recall the steps, get brush, and we're presented with the content browser with tons of things, as I mentioned before, with it. All sorts of crazy stuff, not just hair, but crazy things. Feathers in here, which you do remember, anything you paint you have to convert to polygons, which is less interactive and more of a burden when it comes to animation. So it might not be appropriate. I'm identifying my output, and my result is going to be for a short animation that I think I can use PaintFX. I might replace it with a different type of hair if I need to, and it won't be too difficult if I need to replace it with a different type of hair. I can swap without textures, and that's not unusual that you'd have multiple models even in a small animation project. One to serve for a close-up, one to serve as different types of rigging needs. So anyhow, this is just a modeling course, so we're going to select hair. Okay, and in the content browser under hair, I'm going to choose this one called Body Fur Blonde. Maybe kind of funny using different kind of hair for different reasons, but this one I'm going to choose, and I'm going to paint on it. Remember, holding the B changes the brush size, and we're making sure that this needle is pointing outward here, meaning the normals are pointing out. Of course they are. You would see dark surface. All right, so trying to get the right brush size. Remember with PaintFX, less is more, as few strokes as possible. So you don't want to do tons of dabs around here because each one becomes hard to manage and it becomes a separate stroke in the outliner. Then on the other hand, if we did a mustache like this, say like a handlebar mustache, and we're going to paint like that. All right, that may be well and good, but the flow and the grain of the hair doesn't really follow how the follicles are coming straight down, or they should. So there are demos, tutorials for that, for creating scalp hair and other kinds that you can draw on a make live surface with CV curves, then attach effects to that curve. It's process heavy and a lot involved. So we're going to skip that. You could look that up too. It's interesting. But we are going to do a few short bursts. It's not common that you should do this, but in this case, it's not many. So we're just going to go like down for that side of the mustache, down a little bit for that side. You could do that again, starting a little higher. Got to get the right brush size and not too much. And then second stroke. Not trying to dab too much, but I want to do one more, one more, one more, like that. Okay? Arguably one more perhaps to blend it. So any more than that, we're kind of pushing it just to do a small area, that is, because if we look in the outliner, we are now fussing with 6 strokes. All right, and we're responsible now for going in the attribute editor and changing things. As I mentioned before, you can change the pressure. You can change all this in the behavior of each stroke that you made, the pressure here, tube length. Those, by the way, for drawing mustaches or drawing anything in hair, you can turn them into plants. This is kind of the same algorithm when you're thinking if you wanted to have plants emerge or something, or flowers and that kind of stuff, because the naturalism that hair grows is very similar, of course, to the way grass grows or leaves, or the pattern of chaos and abstraction that happens elsewhere in nature. So let's say for some reason you wanted to add more to that mustache to, I don't know, your fantasy character seems to be growing plants out of its hair. They're here in the body. Now it's a tab called Body Fur because, as I mentioned before, all these techniques really have a similar base. So even though we're using PaintFX, this tab, yep, it's called Fur. And we have under the tab Growth and Creation, we can add leaves and flowers to it. You have to do one at a time in order to see it. Now, now in order to see that through the viewport here, remember we had to change to alpha cut to see under the renderer viewport. In order to see the transparency maps, we have to go back to object sorting, not alpha cut. This is just a display anyway. This is not how the render is going to look. But here, just in the viewport display, that's the only way we're going to see the PaintFX. So if you want to give flowers into the beard or so, this is how you do it. Turning on leaves and twigs and buds. Kind of crazy. So just to note how all this kind of stuff is related in Maya, that's to create naturalistic forms like fur and hair are very similar in technology. And same way if you were creating a forest or some kind of grove or a very overgrown area of plants and so forth. It's using similar base technologies, and you can use PaintFX and Xgen or all that kind of stuff for systems for that as well. Okay, turning all those off, and we're going to make a few more adjustments to have that mingle with our texture and normal map underneath a little better, and then work upon the color. Should work in your outliner. We can select these, and of course we have the global scale. Since we have different strokes, we can do one at a time, or in channel box we can do all of them at a time, but attribute editor one at a time. And we have body fur blonde global scale. Of course, we want to turn that up. It's not that he has a big mustache. He actually has a very thin mustache. But the individual hairs are a bit more dense. So something like that's fine. Expect each one. Actually, I'll put the global scale a little bit down on each. Have them blend. Okay. But now on brush width, I want to expand it a little bit more, so I can max that out. At not 1, maybe 0.8 or so, and if it gets too much, I can take down the global scale. Maybe 0.6 or 0.7 is a good spot. Take it down there, etc. I'll do the rest. Okay, worked on it a little bit in grooming, which is pretty difficult with PaintFX, any sense of grooming. So just wanted to blend all different techniques on one head. That's why I'm using this, and it's coming out okay. So, all right, this is what I have so far. And when it's selected, you can kind of see it. It's very, very light. When I deselect it, I can change the color too. And in the shape and color node, selecting the strokes first in the outliner, and selecting the body fur blonde 6, twirl open the shading, and here we can change the color to a little bit more blonde. Since they're different strokes, you would have to do it for each one, or do them all together in the channel box. The mustache or whatever you're making is looking too thick or thin. Meant to mention under gaps you could put in, you can thin that out in gap size and gap spacing. Here it's under the body fur, whatever node you're using. And all sorts of other behavior things, spiral, bend for curlier hair. Bending. All these are animatable, by the way. You could right click and put a key on those to make hair or plants curl up like that in animation. Pretty cool. Forces, already privy to put on these. Anyway, we were focusing on the color, so back to that. We have here tube shading here, which can also give color to. It's a little bit hard to see with the hair matching the thinness of this hair, but that's our goal. All right, my suggestion is it's a little bit hard to see, and we know we're going to convert this anyway to PaintFX. We're going to convert PaintFX into polygons. Why? So Arnold can render it. So it needs to become actually physical for it to see it, which again is a down part, but that's what we're doing. We're mixing up different techniques to show you in real life here. So we can go to individual pressure of a clump of, let's call it a stroke, not a clump of hair, and increase the pressure of it to make it thicker or to fill in spots. This is going to be pretty fateful. I'm just putting 10 instead of 1. right? If we start converting that to polygons, it's just going to get heavier and heavier. So I'm going to put these back to 1 and just keep it a light. See, it's sort of a hybrid effect. I want it to look like there's something really wispy there, maybe catching the light, but not to look thick enough that it's, you know, like a thick mustache. Now, before we convert, if we go to pressure scale, this is in our stroke shape body fur, and say it looks a little bit too thin compared to the thickness of the hair on the scalp. We can just select this stroke to start with, that one highlighted, and go into pressure scale and change it from off to tube width. We can also change tube length, and per pressure, minimum and maximum for the stroke. If we go to tube width and go to the maximum and turn that up, we can thicken the hairs to make them look more coarse and more visible, so they convert better. I think they were kind of too thin. So here's putting it maybe a little bit higher that you're going to see them, about 6, and I'll convert the rest similarly. There's one for tube length and also other stuff for color, softness. I'm going to change the tube width to maybe about 6, a little bit off the scale because it's so, whoops, that's length by accident. I want width. Change to tube width, and I'm going to put in higher number for each. About 6. All right. Okay, so that will be a little bit more visible during during conversion to polygons. Okay, then I'm going to select all of the strokes in the outliner, and I'm going to modify. Then I'll go to convert PaintFX to polygons. You can option box it and have a limit. Hopefully it's going to be under that. We're going to say convert. If not, if we're over 100,000 limit, we would see a yellow, not a red, but a yellow warning here. Maybe you'd want to go back and reconfigure that. Anyway, now we have polygons, which are represented here by these new groups. So they would have inherited the color that came from your original prescription. So if you didn't go in and change the color of all the rest of those, it's not going to take every single one. It's a different type of mesh. If it's a mesh, it's a different type of surface. So this is why Xgen is a lot more powerful. Just wanted to show you a variety. Because with PaintFX, you have to convert them, and it's going to lose, besides the other disadvantages, it's going to lose some of the color information. It's just simulated here. But anyhow, if we have a few stray hairs here, easy enough to, you know, just select the faces and delete them. Because they're physical, they're real polygons now. Now, make sure you really like that conversion before you delete, and you should then delete the original strokes and just leave you with the polygons, which, yes, it's going to be a problem, or it's going to be a challenge when you have something deforming like this on the face. So if it had to make a facial expression, you would have to have those deforming, and there could be splines used to deform PaintFX. Let's now call them polygons because they've been converted. So extra cautions there, but showing you it might work in a lot of other applications that you want to just spray some effects on with PaintFX. But by this time, you would say, okay, I don't need these strokes anymore, and I can delete them, PaintFX strokes, and you're left behind with the mesh here. And a little bit trim here and there. Okay, and now we're left with something renderable in Arnold. So we can give that a test. By the way, we can turn back on alpha cut since we're done with that. Here in the object sorting to alpha cut. Okay, here's that result just right off the bat. So we'll probably want to lighten that up. That's why you probably want to do some best guesswork before you convert it over to polygons. And I know it's tough, it's kind of limited, but I like the thinness of it. Larry Bird as a character has very thin mustache. It's just about that light, and it's very fine hair like his head hair. It's just the color that's too dark and needing adjusting. But now this is represented as mesh groups, which have its different color node, and we're going to continue to work with that. And we see here that it's been converted into a Phong material. You could of course make it into any kind of AI material. It had some natural transparency. This is fine, but we could put up some of the diffuse and see how it's affecting. Right here, make sure we know what we're looking at. Oh, we're looking at this one. Let's start with this one right there. And okay, can change its ambient color. Make it lighter by turning up the diffuse. Just trying to match what we see with a head hair. And specular color could go a little bit more eye-catching, more shiny to catch, just like the eyebrows, the eyelashes rather, did. Something like that. Okay. And I'll do all the rest. You see that also under the conversion, Maya put a ramp shader on these because where we had fading from tip to root, remember changing that color in the PaintFX to a ramp texture. And if you want the length of the geometry of each hair or each clump of hair, you could make the root darker and the tip lighter, or vice versa, by getting into the ramp and changing that. All right. Okay, and there is our improved thin mustache so far, and we should probably put a little bit better light. It's getting too dark here, and do a few tweaks. Some people, for light testing purposes, like to put, by the way, a big global sphere for Arnold lighting so they don't have to worry about shadows. It's just like an ambient overall sphere for workspace. I'm just not in the habit of that. A lot of people do it though, and it's a very professional way to go too. So if that's what you'd like to do, if you've learned a different way to test light something just with an ambient sphere, that's up to you, of course. I'm just putting the light smacking in an area right in front of it, giving it some drama right off the bat. Getting an early test and feeling what that looks like. All right then, that's about the this is about the effect I was looking for. This very light, wispy, barely noticeable thin mustache that's sort of catching the light and glistening when it's moving. That's fitting my character, I feel. So I'm going to settle about there, and this is optional. Doing the eyelashes, doing the eyebrows with a similar manner. So eyebrows and mustache might kind of match, and I'm going to do that for my character too, since I did it for the mustache and I can go quicker through it since you got the gist of everything. All right, lastly, with the eyebrows, I'm going to do PaintFX similar with the, I guess, a prototype I did for the mustache. It's going to look very alike in texture. So this face mask here, mesh, is paintable. It already was set, just to be sure. Modeling, generate, same place you get Xgen, you get the PaintFX stuff. So make paintable if it's not already, and then get brush, same location, and the content browser opens, and back to hair, and you'll recall that there is one for eyebrow blonde. That's one we'll use to lightly augment the eyebrow there, and we'll just do one stroke. This is already set to a grain that follows horizontally the grain or the direction of the hair, so he doesn't have really bushy eyebrows. So we're just going to start with the average thickness with one single stroke, drawing like that, and then it's too heavy, but we'll modify that. And for the other side, one single stroke there. That's all we need. Just do it over if you want. We can close the Arnold window. I should note, as it's getting heavier with effects, we have a bunch of things going on. Xgen, we have the cards, which has alpha cut in the renderer, and another PaintFX. Maya, like any program, can crash, and if it does, Xgen, sometimes one of its drawbacks in balance to its ease of usefulness is that it can crash, or the Xgen plugin can crash. Should note, if it does that, under Windows Setting Preferences Plugin Manager, scroll all the way to the bottom in this long list, and Xgen is a plugin. Sometimes it can get turned off during a crash and it won't load the Xgen again. If that's the case, you can reload it here. Or if something else crashes because you have faces paintable, a lot of things are going on and interacting that could be dependent on your graphics card. One safe kind of put in the bank keeping is to convert to polygons, because polygons is, by any standards, the most openable object or polygonal based thing. So we can convert from generate here, we can convert Xgen to polygons, and the same place. Actually, if we go to modify, convert, we find it again here, convert Xgen primitives to polygons, and here's a similar place that we converted PaintFX to polygons. That would be a good idea if you wanted to keep something safe that you know could be importable and wouldn't crash the next time. Just know that as you're adding these, you're adding complexity to it. You know, it's doing a lot to be able to generate this kind of detail. Okay, anyway, the last thing we're going to do is we're going to modify this to be thinner and match the mustache. I can open up the stroke shape node using the outliner and sample density. Probably go the other way to simplify that lighter appearance and occurrence of the density. Seed is just the randomness. It's mixing up the random in a different order. So it can be something you like. It's always scrambled. We have back in the eyebrow blonde main node the global scale, which we're going to bring down, sort of not super thick eyebrows, to about 6. And we also have brush profile of width. If you want, you can make it a little wider and bring it down to make it really sparse. I'm going to go with something like that and use that for a prototype for the next one. Little graphics card error that I can't see those, though it's a little bit annoying, but those have already been converted to polygons. They're thicker than this one. I'm going to make the eyebrow a little bit thicker as well to match the mustache. And remember, that's here under pressure scale for the stroke selected. I'm going with 2 width, and for the max, making that a bit thicker. I think I did about 5 for the other one. Alright, then I'm going to change the texture of the second one. Okay, finish the other one to match, and I can convert to polygons now and change the color there, or I can start with a color ramp here while it is a paint effect. Could be your choice. I'm going to go with the conversion first, selecting the stroke for convert PaintFX to polygons. And once again for this one, just hit G, and then you can throw away the strokes. You don't need them anymore. And now with the new Fong material here, change the color ramp to how you like to match everything else. I started with kind of a blue at the root, just like the head hair, and lighter tan or blondish, a little more yellow than that at the tip. It's kind of reversed from the mustache, but similar strategy. Okay, and a little trimming. Now that it's converted to polygons, you could do a little trimming here. If now they're polygonal faces, B is selected for soft select. If you don't need that, then if you like, you could manually trim by selecting faces and deleting. All right, so let's do some final polish with the render with the colors of everything. So there's matching with all the sources of facial and head hair, and that will be it. And we'll leave another video just for the lighting, and another one for attaching the head to the body to the completion of this entire course project for fantasy. And there we go, a better blend of everything together. Okay, looks like maybe a little bit too glistening with the eyebrows and mustache. You can take that down, trying to match the sheen a little closer to the hair and the eyelashes all coming together. Okay. And so there he is, Larry Birdman, and all his facial character, head complete. Okay, next video will be for lighting, as I mentioned, and wrapping up everything else with the completion of this whole character. Okay, until then.